I know most of the time we always say we don't want to be between you and standing for lunch, but this panel is so amazing. You are not going to want to go to lunch. You're going to want to just keep going on. So what I'd like to do first, those of you that know me from my DHS career, I always ad lib. What I'd like to do right now before we start this panel on employees is really give a shout out and a thanks to all the law enforcement people that are working in federal, state, and local law enforcement. You are doing so much in such a challenging time to keep our homeland secure. So please join me in thanking our law enforcement personnel. So our panel today really needs no introduction, but it's on my script, so I'll do that part. First, we have Chief Kari Huffman, who is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Customs and Border Protection. Previously, he was the Executive Assistant Commissioner for Enterprise Services and a long career in Border Patrol. Ms. Angela Bailey, to my right, was the Chief Human Capital Officer of Department of Homeland Security until recently, and now is the founding partner of Ananda Life, which is theme is to elevate the human experience, and I look forward to hearing about elevating the human experience today. So thank you both for joining us. So the first question might take our whole time. In preparing for this panel, we talked about morale, resiliency, integrity, and one of the things we struggled with was really having a word big enough. We started in DHS with suicide prevention, we went through morale and resilience, and we really want something bigger than that about well-being of our employees. So, Chief, could you start out with talking about how you define this whole topic of what we need to do for our employees?
Happy to, and again, thanks for having me here, Elaine, and glad to be part of this. The reason this isn't, first off, I'd like to talk about why this is important, and important to us as an organization. CBP is an organization of 64,000 employees, and we have a very tough job. This last couple of years, our employees have been through a grind unlike I've ever seen in my 37 years on the job. It is very, very tough. And so we need very tough employees. And we do have very tough employees. But as we think about this, and we're kind of going through an evolution of this process with CBP because we need our employees to do more than just being tough, and we need to teach more than just toughness. We've proven we're toughest. Resiliency is a larger discussion about how do we care for those employees. Yes, they are tough, but what else do we do to make sure they're able to do the job well, that we take care of our employees, that those are kind of things. And those how we're evolving in CBP now is beyond just. And so I'm not even sure we're going to stick with the word resilience as we go forward. I think we're going to be labeling something like workforce care or something along those lines as we evolve it this year. We're making big changes as we go forward, but it's more than just being tough. Yeah, we know we're tough. We've proven that. We can do that, but we got to do much, much more to make sure we're taking care of our workforce.
And I think as you've defined it, workforce care includes families too.
Most certainly. We need to take care of our employee. We need to take care of their families. All the stressors in the employee's life that challenges them to an extent. And so we look beyond just those things. How do we take care of the families? Are the services we provide our employees, do we give them to our families as well? Of course we do. You know, that's part of the process to make sure they have those same accesses to the support services that we give, from anything from clinicians to talk to for mental health issues to financial wellness, all those kind of things. We have a whole host of things that we participate in or promoting with our workforce, and it's an ever evolving process because that's not a situation you ever think you're through. You have to always be looking at what's new and what's better and how you can do a better job at it, and we try to get smarter at it. I mean, quite frankly, when I joined the Border Patrol 37 years ago, this wasn't, we were joking earlier saying I don't think we even spell resilience, but let's knew what it meant, right, in our organization. But we had to work very hard to do that. We kind of glorified toughness, right? That was the thing we did. If you're going to work on the border, that's part of it. But if that's all you look at is the toughness, I think we've learned that's a failed model, and that we need to look much beyond that. And that's where we're going, and that's what we're doing now.
And Angie, as Chief Human Capital Officer, you not only partner with CBP in addressing this, but across DHS.
Right.
So what types of patterns were you seeing in DHS and law enforcement, and what can you add to that discussion?
So there were a lot of patterns, and you're right, it went just beyond CBP and actually across TSA. We're noticing it also within FEMA as well. And so I think it kind of goes to some of the things Chief Huffman is talking about, where this idea or this concept that we have to be tough. I mean, I had a 40-year career. I began most of it in DOD. I spent at least 20 years in DOD. And it was a suck it up buttercup kind of environment, right? And so that's also what I grew up in. But what we started to see is that this whole concept really started to evolve into seeing that the science started catching up with it. And we started to understand a little bit more that it's not just about like being able to tough yourself through a situation. Did you know that the number one thing that actually causes stress in a person's life is rumination? So it's not the big events, right? And so everything, that's what we think sometimes. It's about these big events. It's about responding to a hurricane or chasing down the drug cartel in the middle of the desert and finding a child. We think it's these big things, but actually what it is like all of those little thoughts that just keep running through our brain. Like as you're maybe chasing somebody down, it's like, but you had a fight with your wife at home over the dishwasher, right? And you couldn't get your 6-year-old on the school bus on time, and you missed your dentist appointment, and the coffee machine's out of water, and now I found a child in the desert all alone, abandoned. So it's all of those things that, as we started really looking at the science and what the brain does and how it reacts to all of those things, that's whenever we started really, I think, looking at this as seeing it holistically. And how do you take care of the whole person, not just when they're employed at work, but into their families, into their communities, et cetera, because that's how a person lives. They don't just live at work, they actually have full lives that come to work, and what goes on at work goes home.
That is really true, the rumination. And I think the higher your stress level is, the more of that play you get. And Chief, you've also in previous discussions talked about control and lack of control and how that affects stress levels.
I 100% agree with that. People talk about morale and how do you improve morale, and you can improve morale a number of ways. Sometimes it's better equipment, better things. But to me, in my experience, the number one way to improve morale is to give people more control in their lives. That's how you improve morale, the controls in what you do. And sometimes it's not big things, it's little things. It can be a plan to help you find yourself out of a financial bind. It could be a level of control that you thought you did not have in things. It could be as simple as when you go to work, do you get to pick the car you're going to drive, or somebody make you take one car? It's minor stuff, but little things like that make a big difference. If you know that you're being heard and you're able to have some control of it. There's some big things control we may not be able to influence, but the little things, all that stuff helps, because how the little things negative in your lives add up, the little things positive in your lives kind of take some of that stressors away. So we need to look for ways, I think, for all of our workforce to give our employees as much control as we can in their day-to-day work lives, and give them tools and help equip them to deal with control of things that may be spiraling out of control in their private lives as well, whether it's dealing with a drug addiction themselves, or a family member, an alcohol problem themselves, or a family member, a communications challenge with their spouse, all those things. If we can find tools to help them get better and having a better understanding and give that level of control back in their lives, I think it's very positive for their mental well-being, their spiritual well-being, and helps those things go forward. So yes, I'm 100% believer the more control people have in their lives, the better they are.
Were there any other stress indicators systemically you saw when you were with DHS, or those? I guess ruminations kind of summarizes a lot of it. Anything else you'd like to bring up?
Well, one of the things that we were really looking at is this idea called presenteeism. And so presenteeism, what that's really all about is saying that you're present, but you're not really present. So, you can take this conference right now, and I can't see a lot of people, but there's people who are present, but but they're not necessarily mentally present on the job. And so we really started to look at that and say to ourselves, and this kind of goes to what the chief is saying, is how do you address some of the things that are actually causing them to not be present on the job, because it does have an impact on the mission. If you look at TSA, they said, what was it, just last year, 5,700 weapons were confiscated, the most in history. Can you imagine a TSO being on the line and they're not really present because they're worried about all the things that we're talking about that they don't necessarily have control over right now, and then they miss a weapon, or they miss a drug, or they miss something that goes on? This can have devastating consequences on the American public who's traveling. And so Those are just some of the things. We also started looking at, you can't just look at like to the point of your FEV scores, right? This is way beyond that. It also, you have to look at things like, how about the number of DUIs? Are they starting to increase? What about the number of domestic violence calls are those starting to increase? Are we starting to see them in pockets across DHS or just within isolated areas? And one of the things I say all the time is at 250,000 employees, DHS is a microcosm of society. So anything that's going on in society is going on within DHS. And so it's not like it's a standalone island. They are all going to have student loan debt, children with autism, all the other things that they're going to deal with. And so that's what we really started to do, Elaine, is like look across DHS and see where are all the spikes and all these other things that are going on in people's lives. And then you kind of draw that down and you draw a conclusion in some ways that is also going on within DHS. And so how do we get out ahead of that and address those issues?
And it's interesting, Angie, you mentioned the FEV survey. And Chief, when we've talked, you've often said we can't just wait for 2 years. Right. We need continuous monitoring of not only the persons that we're interested in terrorism, but our own people from both a well-being standpoint, but also an integrity standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching that?
Yes, I'm glad to, because lots of times if you use the FEV score as your measurement of the morale or whatever, you're late. You're way behind. I've oftentimes used the example. I've got a son that's a type 1 diabetic, and so you're always chasing those sugar numbers until they come up with a new product that you can monitor his sugar level all the time, so he's never chasing it. He knows as soon as it's out, he can dose himself immediately with insulin. Taking that same concept, we need to come up with ways that we can do the same thing when we're dealing with our employees, the morale issues and challenges, and that can lead to integrity issues as well across the board. And so we're looking in CBP at developing dashboards and things of that nature to help us kind of do that. It's a little complex still, but we're one of the goals is to get where we can have this up-to-date monitoring. We'll know as we're moving along where we're at on those things. And so I think it's how we need to approach most of these things. That way you're not waiting till you're in distress or in crisis before you're addressing that for a particular employee or those kind of things. And it's also having good communications back with the workforce to know that they can access and use these sort of things. The other indicators you may not be able to pick up, but you'll look at things like, as you mentioned, are there a lot of DWI issues, drinking challenges? Are there domestic violence issues? Are there just any number of stressors? Is it a good first-line supervisor having good communications with that employee and knowing what's going on in their lives and the challenges they face? You mentioned everyone has these challenges. You mentioned someone that may have a special needs child that they got to take care of. Understanding that when you're making decisions about who's going to go on detail or who's not or those kind of things. It's getting into that level of understanding is going to make a difference. I mean, it's key to have that level of and it's good leadership too to be able to do that.
And a related area you're really focusing on is integrity. And how does that relate to employee well-being? So
thanks for bringing that up. For me, or I think for CBP as a whole, I kind of talk about these three things. A leader in CBP or a leader anywhere, you owe your employees three things. One, you owe them your leadership. You have to be there in the moment and make those decisions. Two, you owe them your personal integrity. You owe that to them to know that if they're going to follow you and listen to you, that you're that person. And three, you owe them that commitment to take care of them. And those things. Those three things, if you owe your employees anything, your workforce, it's those three things. And that's part of being there, that integrity piece, your integrity and how your actions may influence those, but also how morale challenges, how resiliency challenges or mental health challenges or other stressors in their lives may affect their integrity and lead them to a position where they may be making bad decisions or bad choices. Being in the moment with them on those things are critical in this process.
I love that and the discussion about leadership. Angie, you have 40 years. What could you add about leadership and the role in this?
Right, and you've hit on so many of those. And one of the things that I've really found is this whole idea of just being authentic. Like being yourself and showing up as your best self, to your workforce and as a leader. And so part of this being yourself, though, is like having, I think, these really good, meaningful conversations with your employees so that you really can dig down in deep and find out a little bit better as to what's going on. And then share a little bit about your life with them as well. during the whole COVID thing, the leadership gave me the opportunity to correspond with 250,000 DHS employees, and they got an email from me almost weekly. And I shared with them my journey through this, and then guess what they started doing? They started sharing with me their journey as well. It started out as hundreds, then it became thousands of DHS employees responding back to me. And there were things that I discovered. I remember one time I wrote something about "you're enough," because our folks were really struggling with, that they were giving their kids chicken nuggets and mac and cheese 4 days in a row because that's all they had time for, and they were feeling bad about it. And so I wrote this thing about "you're enough," that it's okay that as you're doing these things, you're enough. And a 3-star admiral in the Coast Guard wrote back to me and he said, "I just want to thank you because some days I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't know if I'm doing enough for my family. I don't know if I'm doing enough for my, for my troops. I just don't know if I'm enough." And I think the point is that as leaders, we're people too. And I think, often we try to put on this bravado like as if we somehow stand above all the issues and the stresses and the things that go on. And sometimes our employees just want to know that we feel it too. We're not sure we're going to get through the day either. It doesn't give us a pass to be a jerk to them or to be mean or to make bad decisions. What I'm saying though instead is that it gives us this opportunity to connect with them on a human level. And I think, at least what I've found, is that my experience has been is that when you draw and you have that connection with them, it's amazing what gets done. Right? So it's not just woo-woo and it feels good and it's just an HR thing. No, it's an actual connection with another human being to say, I got your back in this. It's okay, we're going to get through this particular situation and it's going to suck for both of us today. But I think if we work on this together, then by tomorrow, we'll start to see some sunshine in all of this. And so that's what I've really, I think, have taken away from at least my leadership role within DHS.
That is absolutely true. And even as acting secretary, I had those moments. Probably 24/7. I'm not enough. And I told a story yesterday that I felt I wasn't expecting to be acting secretary, and I felt so inadequate among my peers. And we were actually at Camp David, and they sent the mill aides and the drivers to the wrong location to pick us up. And I happened to walk out first and had no idea where to go, but knew it's probably not a good idea to open the wrong door. And I felt totally inadequate. But then Secretary Mattis, who is one of my idols, came out and he's like, where do we go now? And it was such a human moment. And I thought, well, if Secretary Mattis doesn't know where to go either, then maybe I'm okay and I can get through the next day. But that's interesting because, Chief, you did talk about the culture of sharing and but being strong. And some people think that being strong in law enforcement and being human are two things you can't both be. So that's a cultural thing.
It is a cultural thing, and we've made great progress since I joined. Like I said before, we didn't know anything about it. It would just get tough and then be tougher, right? We didn't, the culture I got in when the Border Patrol was, when I ended up was, you never back up, never take a step back. You're right. You never back up, no matter what. Do not give an inch. And that sounds good, right? And it sounds kind of tough, and that's great. But it turns out it's not really the best way to do it all the time. So you have to do more. And Border Patrol and now CP as the larger CBP has evolved greatly over the years in doing those things and recognizing the challenges that I can't imagine a leader today in CBP not having the ability to rely on our EAP programs and our other support programs, our work-life balance, our chaplaincy programs, all those programs, our veteran support program, which is a relatively new program in CBP, but it's a superb program that was one that was it's a homegrown within veterans. Josh Gill, I give his name, a veteran Border Patrol agent who recognized that challenge and brought it up in the program. And I've been very proud of the CBP leadership to recognize these things. And when years ago you might have just kind of brushed it off and whatever, they embrace these programs and they do a lot to make the employees, the workforce's life is better in areas that we can. I mean, you cannot control everything, but areas that we can, we do. It's important that the leadership, when we come to asking for, our discussions with appropriation staff and budgets, that we ask for these things, that we advocate for those things in those roles and make sure we're getting those kind of things to support those programs. And the CBP role has evolved so much that I'm just very proud of this organization and their willingness to embrace those things, break through the kind of the past. There is still a lot of challenges. There's still some out there where you want to get through the mystique, or the stigma, if you will, that says, hey, well, you're weak if you do that. No, you've got to get past that. And it's going to take the leadership. The leadership's got to talk about it. The leadership's got to use the programs and be willing to talk about using the programs themselves. All those things matter, and they're important. And that's in my 37 years with the Border Patrol and in CBP, I've learned that from other great leaders I have followed, and that you've got to get past that, and you've got to encourage people those things, because we need a workforce that is engaged, that is sound, and making the right decisions.
Right. And being vulnerable does require courage, and that is something that we need to demonstrate and instill as leaders. And Angie, you've talked about resilience and some of the multi-dimensions of resilience. And you even talked a little bit one time when we were talking about climate change and personal protective equipment. Can you just expand on that to just show how broad this issue is?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I know a lot of times, whenever being at DHS and stuff, I would have time to think, because we have such a wide variety of a mission, right? And so when you start thinking about things like for me, I had also the doctors and the nurses and the veterinarians under me as well. So it's not just the humans that I had to actually think about. I had to also think about the horses and the dogs as well. And so you think about things like heat load, right? And you have to, that goes on, that actually impacts people. And so when you had climate change issues and stuff, will that change the migration patterns for how people are going to come into the United States, rather than the southern border, if the north kind of opens up, from everything changing. And so there was just there's just so many different things that I think encompass things that our employees are faced with, and that we have to think about in a much broader sense than just narrowing it down to whether or not, how's your morale today, right? Because there's so much. I mean, if we think about it, I think that there was a study or research or something done that said we receive as much data in one day as we used to receive over a 5-year period. So we're processing all of this data all at one time. So everything that's going on, and I think of our lives as almost being like a bucket, and everything that goes on that pokes a hole in that bucket is what just really depletes us over time. And so, we really started looking at all of these different things that went actually up and above and beyond just thinking about them as an individual on the job with that particular situation that they're facing.
Well, Chief, you shared that in your new role as Chief Operating Officer, you and C2 and C1 have talked about how did the three of you come together and lead CBP. And one of your platform or big issues is this employee issue, as evidenced by you taking the time to come here today. One of the things I used to say when I was deputy is think big, start small, act now. This is a big problem. Yeah. What are you looking at in your CAO role to do in the next month, next 6 months towards this huge multi-year problem?
So thank you. There's a quote, I forget his name, but it starts off, make no little plans because they do not inspire the dreams, right? So we make big plans, and we have big plans, what we're trying to do. And so we had with the FY22 budget, we've kind of flipped the switch a little bit. Normally, historically, we have applied what we had to the employee resilient wellness. We're changing that. We're going to apply what we need, and so we ask for what we need. And so we had a substantial budget this year in FY20 to deal with the resiliency challenges. And so some things we've started along last year, even before we had the money to do it. But kind of the big things is, one, we've taken our resiliency program, again, it may be called something else time we get through with this, but I'll use that now. I like workforce care, but we will, because I want to encompass, it's more than just about making employees tough, it's about giving them tools and skills and that they need to help themselves. But we've actually, for now, we have pulled that out of our HRM department, and we have made it a direct report to the EAC or Enterprise Services. So that's a direct report in the front office. So we've taken several layers, and we've done that for a number of reasons. We want to have the ability to affect change quickly, and we want to move it out across all of CBP. So that is one of the things we've done. Starting in FY19, we started a pilot program of putting clinicians in the field at select locations. And that was an idea that came out of a 2017 RAND study about when you first start talking to a clinician in the law enforcement world, kind of get back that, if a crisis is the first time you talk to somebody, it's not as effective. You want to have that communication relationship set up prior to the moment of crisis to deal with. So we started placing these on-site clinicians, licensed clinicians, around the country in select locations, and we're continuing to expand that. By shortly we'll have, actually now we have about 22 around the country in different sectors and DFO officers around the country, and that expand that ability to access that clinician at the workforce. Secondly, next thing we're doing is that we're hiring 13 full-time occupational psychologists and we're building these field teams. They'll be in 13 locations around the country, and these occupational psychologists is more than just a clinician. It is, and it's going to be at the call of the sector, Border Patrol sector chiefs and the DFOs around the country, and these, and there'll be a team of them. It'll be the psychologists, and the team will be made up. Normally we have our peer support and our chaplaincy are kind of a collateral duty. We're going to announce those and make that a full-time team for that time period that they're the chaplains will do like 1 year assignments or 2 years assignments with that, and so they won't be drug off with everything else. That'll be focused solely on these resiliency issues that we're trying to deal with, and those teams will be applied around the 13 locations around the country, and they're still working at the exact locations. Again, that's the reason we asked for the money we got in the FY22 budget. We're very grateful that they gave it to us. And so we'll start announcing those jobs mid-April, and to get those people selected and deployed throughout the team. And that's the structure and the foundation that we'll be setting up all of our other things going forward. That direct access to the front office, the direct accountability, and the expansion of the clinicians, and the new to the world is these occupational psychologists that we're going to be playing around the world. We think that's going to be a big step forward. We think that is a huge step for a law enforcement agency to do that. If you look at any of the other large law enforcement agencies, they have those kind of accesses. A lot of them do, and the ones that don't wish they did. And we're going to get out of the wish we did and actually have them thing. And I think it's symbolic of the commitment that the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, has made to understand the challenges we face. It's not going to solve all the problems in the world, but we're trying to get to the point where we can help as much as we can in those environments. So that's just kind of across the top of what we're looking at, aside from the other ongoing programs we've had and will continue to have, from the physical fitness, the financial literacy courses and the financial training and those kind of things, plus the EAP program that gives your families ability to call and get services that you and your family as well. So we have a whole host of things that we're doing that I could probably list off another 30 minutes worth, so I'll try not to bore you with all that. Just trust me. I love it. We've got a lot going on, and we're doing a lot more. That's what I'm trying to say.
I love also that you're doing the clinician program at the sector level, because change is scary, and there's some kind of ominous thing about DC and headquarters. So the fact that you're driving it down, I think will really be great.
We've had a lot of great feedback. I mean, I've had a number of Border Patrol sector chiefs and DFOs that tell me personally that they believe they intervened early enough, that they had some saves, people that were employees that were considering harming themselves, and they had those early interventions just because of that, and their ability and willingness to communicate with the frontline employees one-on-one. I think it's huge. It's huge. Like I said, you don't want that first communications to be when they're in crisis. They need to have that relationship ahead of time.
I think that that's a really important point about not doing it when they're in the middle of a crisis. And so some of the things, and so for me, like, just to dive way down in at a very tactical level, is like sitting down with our employees and saying to them, if this was a grid of what depletes you versus what renews you, let's just talk through that. What all day long, just start recording everything that depletes your energy. That at the end of the day, then whenever you get home and you don't have time to watch your child ride their bike or walk your puppy or even go work out because you're completely depleted of energy, what are those depleting things? And then let's start to address those. So if it's a financial concern, that's where the financial literacy comes from. If it's, a child that you're struggling with because they have autism. I know ICE started, I think it was parents with children with autism, like an employee resource group. So I think that sometimes there's these very basic things, which I think you're getting at, Chief, is to sit down with employees and just start asking them individually, what are some of the things that, again, are depleting? Then what renews you? Well, going for a walk really renews me. Working out in the gym renews me. Reading, having time to read, my child a story at night renews me. And then finding ways to actually give them those opportunities to renew their energy is where we were able to start, I think, starting to see some of the balance for our employees. And so it's this beautiful combination, I think. And I do want to say this, the thing I loved about DHS, and again, I mentioned I worked in DOD for a long time. DOD, and I was an Army wife, and so DOD has great programs for their military and their families, but not for their civilians. There is no federal agency who has dedicated the amount of time and energy and money toward the employee and their families than DHS. I know of no other. And so it is really, I think, incredible, because what we're really trying to say is, yeah, this is absolutely for the employee's benefit, but it also is mission imperative. Because if we don't have employees that are if we have employees that are so completely depleted and cannot even put one foot in front of the other, then they're going to make mistakes, because that's when mistakes happen. Your brain does not function well when you're under that much stress. That's not where the creative juices come from. They come from whenever you're in a much more relaxed state. So we've combined in DHS, I say we like as if I'm still there.
I still say it.
I know, it's just, but what we did is we combined great leadership who really supported it and understood it. Like Chief and his wife did videos for me on our Stronger Bonds program, which we can talk about. Used to be teased about that a lot and told, oh, so Ange, now you're offering marriage counseling, right? And I was like, you know what? If it means that they're going to have a good life at home, then guess what? When they come to work, they can focus on work, right? So this isn't just about making sure that they have, a nice conversation with their wife. It's that they're able to then perform ultimately at the highest levels when they're at work and stuff. So we had great, leadership support in all of this, but we also combined the neuroscience. We really started looking at what does the neuroscience tell you about how the brain, the heart, and the gut, because all three of them are a brain, and all three actually work to drive and make decisions and interactions. So we really started looking at that as well as the programs that we then put in place. So there's, I think that it was just a fantastic combination of a lot of things that are making sense for DHS.
And I like that you talk about the science, both as the Chief Human Capital Officer in your new endeavor, because somehow having science behind it makes it more palatable. It makes it say it's okay.
Right.
And I'm curious, both of you have long careers in government. Chief, you are still a green suitor, I guess,
yes.
even though it's parked.
Yeah.
How have you evolved your leadership thought, and how did you get to this point where this is your number one?
So for me, it's a number of things. One, I've had great mentors myself. I can name off a number of great leaders who saw through some of the concerns, the stigma, and still forced these issues early on, even pre-CBP when you would not think so. And it's always, to get to this point, and then there's always been a balance of those that didn't. So as you see that evolve over the years, and you just kind of realize in the different leadership roles how important your workforce is. How, you develop a level of care for your workforce that when you're one of the workforce, it's one thing, but you start feeling responsible for them personally and how they're going to do and what you can do, and you see those things, and so it just becomes, you realize that's just the key things. There's nothing really more important than trying to accomplish and making sure you are taking care of your workforce, and it's important to do so. So as you see that evolve, and you see how much better things are, you counter with kind of the tragedies you've seen and different challenges, and you realize the stressors they're under. So it just becomes, it's evolved my number one things, and I've followed other people who've made it there as well. And if you want to leave something when your career is over with, if you can leave an ability for employees to be better, live better, be healthier, and their lives better, there's not a better legacy to leave than anything. And I'm grateful for the legacy, those that I have, mentors I've had that left that. And I just feel obligated to take it to another level. I can, those that know Chief Woody Lee with the Border Patrol. He was a big leader, and he's one of those clinicians pilot we started. He started that process, and what a big deal. Chief Dan Harris, who's also retired, he started the Border Patrol chaplaincy program back in the late 90s, pre-CBP, and started that EAP program. He's the one that led the thing. You look at those folks that have done those things, and you feel like you owe it to the workforce. You owe it to everybody else to make sure you're giving your very best, that they have the opportunities to make their lives better personally and at workforce. We're going through a grind right now. I mean, there's no question, though. A lot of the CBP workforce is just having a tough time with what we're seeing on the border. I mean, you can't ignore that. And some things you can change, and some things you can't. But the things we can change, we're going to work hard on doing those things and give the employees what they have, and we just owe it to them.
One of the related topics, diversity and inclusion. It's kind of a buzzword, but it's so important, or buzzwords. We all want a peer group. We all want to feel like we belong to something. Do you feel like diversity and inclusion has a role in the whole resilience issue or workforce well-being issue? We'll start just using it and then it'll catch on.
Yeah, exactly. So, I agree. This whole diversity and inclusion, I think sometimes we think diversity is, it's like Noah's Ark. If we have two of everything, then we're diverse. And it's like, yes, but if people don't actually feel included, once you fill up Noah's Ark, then it's for nothing. But one of the things that I challenged the team to do when I was at DHS is stop looking at it as diversity and inclusion and equity and accessibility. Stop looking at it as the buzzwords. Let's instead just step back. Let's work with the components and say, what does it look like to elevate the human experience? What does that look like? What does it look like to lead with intention? What does it look like to create an environment in which you have shared connections? And it was amazing how once you started really reframing it and saying, okay, to elevate the human experience, we have to actually look at the whole person, right? We can't just look at them while they're at work. We have to look at all the things that affect them throughout the day, and beyond. And then how does that affect them into the community? And then how does that boomerang right back, actually, to what we see goes on in society, and then DHS has to deal with, right, at the end of the day. And so we really started stepping back and just taking this very holistic approach of looking at it, and I think it all by itself, it started to cause the words to just fall away, the buzzwords to fall away, and we started to actually dig in deep and have really meaningful conversations about, again, what does it mean to lead with intention? What does that even mean? And so, again, I think it's just really helpful. It does improve things. I mean, there's all kinds of studies out there. It's not so much that you have the diversity as much as you have, well, the diversity, of course, is important, but that you have once you're there, that you feel included, that you have a voice, that you, as a leader, know how to read the room, that when somebody is quiet, it may not, and they have their head down, it may not mean that they're thinking about what their next Facebook post is going to be. It could be that they have their head down because they're just struggling, or that's how they think. Some people don't think by verbalizing. Some people think by just keeping their head down. And so that's what we meant by leading by it, with intention, is really understanding all of these other factors that go into the human experience, and then, really, digest that and be able to build programs around that.
And I like the leadership with intention. Chief, I kept waiting up until the last minute for you to cancel out with everything that's going on in CBP, and you didn't. Yeah. And so that clearly is leading with intention. How are you finding those boundaries to really focus on the people in this chaotic time?
Yeah. So it is a challenge. It is a challenging times. There's no question about it. With what we're facing, what we've seen this last year, and what we're facing coming up. But it's one, I'm in a position where I can influence that a little bit, which is good. I'm working with the deputy commissioner and commissioner who both feel that's important as well. So that gives you the ability to make those things. The secretary Mayorkas, he believes that's important as well, and he leads those things. So those kind of gives you the ability to do that. But also you have to use your personal influence and experiences to shape the conversation. You got to shape it towards meaningful. It's got to shape it towards, it comes from someone who who tries to be in the boots of a frontline employees who are trying to do these jobs and see the world from their view, to understand what they're going through and what they're facing, and it's trying to get in that thing. And it takes a lot of conversations, and a lot of different things going on, talking to different people, listening to different people, having good conversations, not just the easy conversations, the hard, difficult conversations. We've had a number of those throughout this last year. I mentioned this before, this last year was the toughest I've ever seen. We lost 64 employees to COVID since it started. 57 are line of duty deaths, employees that had to go to work and face those dangers every day. And so we've had far too many funerals we went to, far too many conversations with family members and those kind of things. And you see and feel that pain, and it has to influence you in such a way. And it's one thing to let it influence you emotionally and say, oh, that's bad, and move on. Or you take that experience, positive or negative, and you start formulating something on behalf of the workforce to make something better in any way you can. That's the key, and that's the challenge, and that's what the current leadership is doing for them. I had the commitment of all the leadership of all of CBP, all the executive assistant commissioners are all on board with this process. They all understand the challenge we face, and it's an evolutionary process. But it is those kind of things combined that helps you drive forward and make this sort of a commitment from the agency to the workforce. And
you're doing a lot of traveling to the front lines. Are you getting authentic, honest feedback to help you?
If you've ever done a border patrol muster, you will get authentic feedback. Trust me, you need it. And that's important. I mean, that shapes how you make decisions. That's how you hear things. And I hear a great commentary, a great frontline perspective, and you got to think about those things. You got to listen to those things. It's one thing to hear them, but you've got to know what they're doing. But for me, I've been on the other side of that. I've been in that muster, telling the bosses what I think was wrong, right? So that's part of the deal. So you need to be able to listen to that, take what you can out of it, and shape what you can out of it. So those are things that are important, and you have to do that, and it's important to that. I mean, I love the opportunity to get in front of a bunch of frontline employees, Border Patrol, OFO, Air and Marine. I do it every chance I get, because that's those Q&As. That's where you learn, and that's where you get those things, and they deserve to hear from you. Those wild, crazy, stupid ideas come out of headquarters. Why? Because from their perspective, they are wild, and sometimes they are wild, crazy, stupid. But anyway, those conversations are important.
Right. What I'd like to do is we want to change things up a little bit and take some questions now, and then give our two panelists some time to give some closing comments. So are there any questions from anyone in the audience this afternoon?
Yes, I have a question. My name is Olivia Trevisani-Bowker with Amivero, and I just want to say this is the first time that I've seen this topic at a conference, and I absolutely love it. People are our greatest assets, and we need to take better care of them. I was wondering where you see the talent management and career management as a factor in what you're doing. And I ask from a company that does RPA work. So we've noticed some lack of adoption in some areas because people are really not wanting to do other things with their career and their time. So I am curious, knowing what you said about people feeling valued, and career is typically a big part of that. How are you planning to help people with their careers so they can continue to feel valued in a world where technology in so many areas is moving quickly and taking over?
I can go first on that one. So well, thank you for that question. That's a great question, and one of the things I'd hope we would kind of lean into, and it kind of makes, when we talk about this, our workforce care commitment and what we're trying to do and make sure the things we're trying to do, it is because I believe CBP, I know I'm focused on CBP, but that's okay. But I believe we have one of the best, brightest, most hardworking, solid workforces there are in the country. They've proven that just by what they've been able to stand up and withstand over the last couple of years. But we compete on the world stage with everybody to continue to fill up those ranks, to get those kind of people. And so you have to be able to show them that you care for them. They got to feel it, not just show it, but actually mean it and do those kind of care things. So that's why it's important for us in this workforce care concept, that they understand they're coming to a place that values who they are as a person, values what they can do, and wants to take care of them to continue that process. And that we have very much aligned values of what our organization stands for and what we're trying to accomplish. They align with their values and want to keep going. So it is very important to do that. And then as that evolves, the career development process, we devote a lot of time, areas we can always do better, to training and developing leadership skills and different trainings to move around and do the different things in the organization. We try to continue to open those up as well as we go forward. But those are the things that we are working on ourselves within CBP.
Yeah, and then at the DHS level, some of the things that I would be responsible for is how do I help create, or at least write the legislation or the rules and the regulations and things that actually set it up in such a way that what we're trying to allow our employees to be able to do, that they actually can do it. Because we work in a very archaic, it goes back to the 1920s, our civil service. And so, my job then was to figure out ways to reform that system in such a way that we could allow employees to have what I'll call a career portfolio instead of just a career path. Because, for example, we know within law enforcement, if someone comes into TSA, often they go from TSA to CBP or to the Secret Service, and then from there they often go to ICE. So we know that there's a natural law enforcement movement for many of our folks. How do we then make sure that we lay a system on top of that that allows for that natural momentum to happen, or movement to happen, so that people can feel valued and can progress in their careers the way that they want to? It used to be that if you came into a job and you even thought about leaving, you were disloyal, right? That's your job for 30 years, but it's just not the way the world works anymore. And so, it's recognizing that the world has changed, and then how do we put systems on top of it that allow for that to occur?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for a great question.
Any other questions? Or I'll keep going. You're going to get honest answers. This is a rarity. Going once? Okay. All right, so I'll keep going. If anybody, we can't see, so if anybody comes up to the microphone, you'll have to tap on it or something so that we can know you're out there. But one of the things I wanted to touch on is we talk about well-being, and we've kind of gone back and forth a little bit between personal, so an employee having well-being, being healthy, being present in the workplace, but also organizational resiliency. In these changing times, one of the differences I saw coming from DoD also is how nimble and quick the enemy changes, as opposed to a state actor enemy. The terrorists and those type of things and threats to our homeland security evolve so quickly. So how do you combine personal resiliency or well-being and build it into organizational well-being?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you how I look at it myself. And when I talk to leaders in this organization, in CBP and across, I'm still after 37 years, despite the challenge, very enthusiastic about the organization and who we are. DHS and CBP as a whole is still a relatively young organization. I mean, it's just 20 years old. When you compare to a DOD or a Commerce or a Treasury, it's been around, over hundreds of years. We're still new. We're still evolving. We're still malleable. So this is a great time if you're a leadership in this organization to be a part of the DHS structure, because you're shaping a department of the U.S. government. You will never have that opportunity again in your lifetime, or at least I want, to shape another department of the U.S. government. And so everything we've learned from our other organizations, this is the time you make those decisions. This is when you shape those policies, you shape those ideas, you shape the structure of who we are as an organization, where CBP and DHS as a whole. And so you need to seize those opportunities to do that, like this resiliency or workforce care. We're making that a core laydown. It's not something we're going to do after that we had to catch up. It's going to be part of who we are as we evolve as a department. So to me, that helps us organizationally, how we're laying this out, and develop this resiliency or this care or this mindset or this culture into a process. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while to shape these things, but we're maybe a teenager, I guess, at best as an apartment, so we can still learn things, although some people say teenagers can't learn things. I think they can, but this is the point that we do that. So that's what I talk about, and that's what I like to instill upon anyone in this organization, that you have a rare opportunity in your hands. If you're a career federal public servant, you believe in who we are, you believe in this country and what we do, there's no better time to be part of this organization than right now.
And also along those lines as well is that one of the things I recognize with DHS is there are cultures within cultures, right? So even though, like you said, like DHS and CBP might be only 20 years old, but how old is the Border Patrol? Yeah. Right? And how old Secret Service goes back to the Civil War. And they were designed for, they were chasing down stagecoaches because it was really all about financial crimes and stuff. And then it grew into what it is today. So, and then you have CISA, which is only just a couple of years old. And so the thing what I always try to say is that culture is important. And believe it or not, people, like from an anthropology standpoint, people love their culture even if it's bad. They will hold on to a bad culture just as much as a good culture because at least it's something that they know. And so that's why changing cultures can be so incredibly difficult, even when it's bad. And so one of the things that we try to do, I think, is look at the cultures within the cultures and recognize those and appreciate those. But then to your point, how do we then bring it all together? And I think, and at least in the 6 years that I was there, Elaine, you were there for a few of those years as well, of my 6 years that were there. I know you were there much longer. But what I saw us collectively doing is we really put an effort into the management structure and making sure that we got in touch with the components and we started collaborating and working together. We started taking trips, down to the border to sit down. I sat down with Mrs. Vitello and the spouses one night at dinner. That's whenever I learned things about the fact that many of our agents marry local. And when they marry local, some of them do not speak English. So what do we need to do? Some of them didn't even know what a checking account was. So that's whenever we would have conversations around how do we improve then our financial literacy programs and things. It also was born out of some of those ideas or at least having conversations, was the idea when we do onboarding for DHS, now we onboard the family, not just the employee. We're working to onboard the family. Why? Because when you sign up for a career in DHS, and in particular CBP, the whole family signs up. You don't get to, when you miss your child's birthday party, they need to understand that the whole family has just dedicated their lives to the DHS mission. And so we created an employee resource page, and there's a whole kids corner. And the kids corner is so that our children can understand what their parents do so that they can get behind it and be proud of it. And then they become part of that culture as well.
So in my last question, and you can incorporate closing comments, what do you say to the employee that's worried about the stigma? So all this is great. I agree with the philosophy, but we've had such a focus on suitability. I know that if I admit I'm having marital troubles, you'll revoke my suitability. I know if I say I'm concerned about suicide, you'll take my gun. How do you start addressing the stigma and the fear of, is this talk or is this real?
Well, you do it a couple of ways. First, you don't just talk about it, you demonstrate it with actions. And it is still a problem with our organization. It's not a solved problem by all, but we're looking at it. We have a number of employee stories where they talk about where they sought help and things are going down. We've had this panel working this last year to come up with other alternatives when someone feels they reach out to their supervisor for help. The first thing shouldn't be to take their gun away from them and put them on desk duty. Some of that is still going on. I won't pretend that we don't have that. We have that solved. My commitment is that we're looking at trying to find new ways to do that and work through those processes. We have also elevated the front office in CBP. We have Dr. Kent Corso. His title is his job title. He's a suicidologist. I know it sounds bad, but that's what he does. He studies suicides, and we have him answering directly to the front office for those very reasons, to help us come up with ways and plans to address that situation, because it'll never get better if we just shrug our shoulders every time it happens. They're not taking a constructive steps to try to get to answers. We're not, I don't think we have that problem solved yet, but other than I can give an honest commitment that we're trying to get to that area.
And Angie, what I'd like, and then we'll have Chief close us out, is what words do you have to those mid-level people, those first-level supervisors, the second-level supervisors, that really are the ones that have to take what we heard from Chief Huffman and drive it through the organization? What words of advice do you have to make this really a lasting, real thing?
Yeah, for our first-line supervisors in particular, my heart goes out to them because they're the ones that often they're beat up from the top, they're beat up from the bottom, and they're struggling themselves. And so one of the first things I always say to my first-line supervisors is, let's figure out how to take care of you first. Right? Because you have got to get yourself, we have to make you self-aware of where you have your stressors, what's depleting you. Because if you're not well, you're never going to be able to lead the very group that is sitting in or standing in front of you. And so that is really the number one thing that I've said to the first line supervisors is, let's really focus our intention on you and helping you understand, and with these tools and these techniques, and let's introduce them to some of these things so that we can grow them into the person that they want to be. And then what I have found is that then they are capable of leading. I think too often the reason leaders fail at leadership is because they're not even capable of leading themselves. And when you're not capable of leading yourself, it's almost impossible to lead others. And so that would really be my number one thing is, you know, it's kind of like when you fly and they tell you to put your mask on first before you put it on, you know, the person beside you. It's kind of the same concept. And we have to stop thinking of self-care as being selfish or as being, you know, like not caring about others. No, taking care of yourself and making sure that you have enough energy left at the end of the day to take care of your workforce is not selfish. Like, that's actually mission imperative in my mind.
Chief, you have the opportunity to not only close out this panel, but close out the whole formal part of the conference.
Well, that's a big task, but I'll do my best. All right, for that. So I want to talk about this panel. Why is it important? Why this resiliency or workforce care? Why is it important? Last year, well, one, proud to be part of CBP, the leadership team of what I think is one of the premier law enforcement agencies in the country, bar none, across the board. Last year, this organization had over 1.7 million encounters, extraordinary amount of numbers. We seized nearly 1 million pounds of narcotics, $70 million in cash seizures across the board, inspected untold thousands of people, collected $93 billion in revenues. And by the way, I like that better than IRS because that comes out of somebody else's pocket. It's not your own pocket, right? That's what makes us better than those guys. But so that's important. And the grind our workforce has gone to. We had a high level of suicides last year. We had a high level of employees' deaths, high level of stressors based on the environment we've been through, the stressors from the workforce, from the vaccine mandates, the COVID overlays, all those things. In the middle of all this stuff, with the largest number of people coming across our southwest border ever, we had to stop in the middle of that and address the Operation Allied Refuge or Allied Welcome that come, and we had to send employees into that way to work that process. All that on top of that shows that we're one of the most premier law enforcement agencies out there, but we're always written in as the villain of every story, and that's a high level of frustration. And this goes back to you talking about when you have these musters. I was at a muster one time, not too long ago, and a young agent raised his hand and asked me, he used these words. He says, "We are the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the country, and we don't get credit for it." And I looked at that, and I have been echoing that ever since. I looked over his Chief McGoffin, and said, "Chief, when you hear this line come back out, make sure this employee gets a cash reward, because I'm going to use that line from now on." It's because we are the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the country, perhaps the world, but we have the stats to prove it. Over 13,000 rescues last year. We saved 26 lives with the defibrillators, 19 lives with the Narcan. We've got thousands of rescue beacons out there. We've got over 1,500 EMTs out there. We do countless rescues with our Air and Marine folks. We have the OFO folks that went to Afghanistan and the lives they saved and the work they did at the ports. And I often say this, people don't realize that if you're a Uyghur Muslim in the Xinjiang province of China, your only hope of any better life is there's a CBP employee around the world making sure we don't import goods produced by forced labor into this world. In fact, we led to over $30 million worth of repayments to salaries to those folks last year alone. So we're able to project our values like that around the world. So I say proudly that one thing is that although we are a law enforcement agency, we're not a humanitarian organization, but we do such, because of those challenges, we are the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the world. And we go forward under that thing. Said another agent told me one time, and I use this line as well. He says, "We do not let our authority outpace our humanity." And I like the way he said that. And that's who we are as an organization. And so that's why this is important, because the people that are standing in that gap now, that are looking at what's coming, you know, Chief Ortiz talked about yesterday, we probably already hit 1 million so far this year by now. We will hit well over that for this over. They're the same people that we have to be standing strong to support. So, one, I thank you for this organization, and I thank your organization for supporting them as well. So thank you for the opportunity to say
Inspiring.
that.
Thank you. Love it. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Group hug.